preservation of and increased access to the 92nd Street Y Humanities Audio Archives is generously funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities.
Good evening. Thank you for your patience and perseverance as we change the stage around a little bit. For those of you who've been here watching, you know that's not usually what we do. I'm Deborah Nadel McGee, Director of the Charles Simon Center for Adult Life and Learning here at the 92nd Street Y. And I'd like to welcome you to our 2000-2001 lecture season, Great Minds Don't Think Alike. We're now about halfway through our fall season, and we're getting ready for actually putting our spring catalog to bed. You can look forward to that sometime around, I think mid-November. Tonight's distinguished panel, members of the American Heritage Dictionary Usage Panel, will be discussing the future of the American English language. They will focus on how American English has and will continue to be influenced by cultural phenomenon, including technology and pop culture. Our moderator this evening is Geoffrey Nunberg, the principal scientist at the Xerox Palo Alto Research Center and professor of linguistics at Stanford University. Mr. Nunberg has chaired the usage panel of the American Heritage Dictionary since 1988. And you probably know him best, at least you know his voice best, for his regularly scheduled program on NPR's Fresh Air. He comes to us tonight all the way from San Francisco. Following the panel discussion, you will have the opportunity to ask questions of our guests, and the very beautiful 4th edition of the American Heritage Dictionary is available for purchase in the lobby adjacent to this room, and it really is a wonderful dictionary, I have to say. And now, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming tonight's moderator, Geoffrey Nunberg. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Deborah. I want to thank you on behalf of the Y and the American Heritage Dictionary for coming this evening. I was desperately looking for a way to hook this event to Halloween, and in that connection, I thought I would look in the American Heritage, the new edition. This is the White Album of American Lexicography, isn't it? And in the course of this, I looked up the word werewolf, and we have a nice little word history essay. So I thought I'd read that. VW. Word history. The wolf in werewolf is current English. The weir is not. Werewolf occurs only once in Old English, around the year 1000, in the laws of King Canute, where it said, "Lest the madly ravenous werewolf too savagely tear or devour too much from a godly flock." The weir in werewolf means man. It's related to Latin vir, or weir, with the same meaning, the source of virile and virility. And speaking as a usage editor, it immediately occurred to me to ask whether the word werewolf is appropriately applied of a woman, and this is something we'll ask the panel about later. The appearance of a new dictionary is always an occasion for thinking about the language and reflecting on the state of the language. And in the history of American dictionaries, beginning with Noah Webster's Dictionary of the English Language in America in 1828, if you'll cast your minds back, there have always been controversies and discussions about the language that surround the appearance of a new dictionary. We hope the appearance of the American Heritage is no exception. There was the flurry of controversy around the dictionary war of the 1840s, around the appearance of Funk and Wagnalls, and more recently in 1961, around the appearance of Webster's Third, which took an approach to usage that some critics objected to. And that controversy in the 60s raised the question of what the appropriate treatment of usage in a dictionary should be. Should a dictionary merely be content to describe the way the language is used, or should a dictionary prescribe and try to set standards? And the American Heritage Dictionary, which first appeared in 1969 and has now in its fourth edition, was in certain ways a response to that controversy. It's an extraordinary dictionary in its treatment of etymologies and its word histories and its illustrations and so on. But one of the things that makes the dictionary exceptional or particular among American dictionaries is in its treatment of usage, where the editors have tried to provide the reader with the sorts of information that readers need to make up their own minds on questions of usage. And one of the solutions that they came up with, the original editors, a solution that's evolved over the course of time, was to establish a usage panel, a group of originally 100, now close to 200 well-known writers, editors, scholars, other people with a particular interest in or insight into the English language, who would be regularly polled on questions of usage, and whose views and judgments and votes would be reported in the usage notes of the dictionary. Some people think that the panel actually meets to discuss its deliberations. Roy Blount, one of our participants tonight, was asked about the panel at one point, and he said he had this fond notion when he first was invited to join, that the panelists get together once a year at a banquet to wave joints of mutton and belch and argue about words. Unfortunately, that isn't the way it works. The editors and I come up with the ballots and send them out to the panelists who rarely meet. But tonight, we're fortunate to have four of the panelists with us to talk about this state of the language, and in particular, four of the most interesting and witty of the members of the usage panel. We'd like to think they were all witty, but the panel contains several linguists, which bring down the average. So let me introduce, what I'd like to do is introduce the four panelists, bring them out. We'll have a little discussion. I'll ask each of the panelists to say a bit, to speak for a few minutes about their particular interests in usage. We'll talk amongst ourselves. Then what I thought I'd do was to actually pull out some of the ballots and raise some of the very issues that we asked the panelists about. I'll ask the audience what your view is, and then we'll see what the panelists thought, and we'll talk about those and finally open this up for questions. So let me introduce the panelists now. We have, as I said, Roy Blount, one of America's great humorists, among other things. He's written for more than 100 publications. He's written 14 books on sports, anthologies and collections, novels, personal memoirs. He did, coming out. We're going to do one by one. Yeah, we're going to do this. A one-man show at the American Palace Theater. And also is a member of a rock band together.
American Place Theater, Palace.
American Place Theater. The member of that's my writing, and the member of a rock, the Rock Bottom Remainders.
Yeah.
And I just want to read a quote. There's a quote of yours. I want you to explain at some point. The American English sentence is like a George Price cartoon. You're going to explain that at some point. In which connection, we are happy also to have with us Ed Koren. Ed is known, I think, to everybody here as a regular contributor to the New Yorker magazine for close to 40 years. His work has also appeared in many magazines and newspapers in the U.S. and abroad. He grew up in and around New York City, attended Columbia University, and did graduate studies in Paris and at Pratt. He's published many books and has also illustrated books for children and adults. The most recent being Pet Peeves, with the text by George Plimpton. He lives in Vermont with his ménage, he's said here. Frank Deford is generally considered the dean of American sportswriters. His work has appeared in virtually every medium and magazines. He's returned to Sports Illustrated, where his byline originally appeared between 1962 and 1989. On television, he's a correspondent on the HBO show Real Sports with Bryant Gumbel, and on radio, he may be heard as a commentator every Wednesday morning on Morning Edition on NPR. Deford's the author of a dozen books, including his most recently collection of his NPR commentaries entitled The Best of Frank Deford, I'm Just Getting Started. He's written 7 novels, the most recent of which is The Other Adonis, a psychological thriller about a Rubens painting and reincarnation, which is going to be published next year. 2 of his books, the novel Everybody's All-American and Alex, The Life of a Child, his memoir about his daughter who died of cystic fibrosis, have been made into movies. He also wrote the original screenplay for another film, the comedy Trading Hearts. And finally, Rachel Brownstein. Ladies last. Teaches in the doctoral program in English and runs the Master of Arts in Liberal Studies program at the CUNY Graduate Center on 42nd Street. Professor Brownstein is the author of several books on English literature, Becoming a Heroine, Reading About Women in the Novel, which is a survey of this issue in English literature from Samuel Richardson to Virginia Woolf. And a book, Tragic Muse, about the French actress Rachel, and is the author of numerous articles and reviews about literature and film. So maybe we can have one round of applause for the entire panel. And then to start the discussion, Roy, maybe I'll start with you. Is there anything that, particular points of use that, as you Southerners say, sticks in your craw?
Well, since I am from Georgia and came up here, it always pleases me to find New York publications wrong. And, you can often do that on the basis of who and whom. For instance, I tried to pick, I've got endless files here, just because I see them and I tear them out. I wanted to find the spiciest ones. For instance, the New York Times. In the 1988 interview, Mrs. Exner also said Kennedy had her arrange more than 10 meetings with Giancana, whom she said was also her lover. Now, that's trashy on many levels, but one level is that it's supposed to be who she said was also her lover. On the other hand, I don't want to be, I'm not a stickler. I mean, I'm not, here's, for instance, Monica Lewinsky wrote a note reproduced in the New York Times Magazine, Dear Mr. P. This was addressed to Mr. P. All of my life, everyone has always said that I am a difficult person for whom to shop. Now that's correct, but I would say that you should avoid getting involved with women who write, I am a difficult person for whom to shop. After all, most people would say to shop for. And here's another reference to that case, which is grammatically wrong, but in fact, I don't know, this is an interesting case. Some guy involved in the investigation of the Lewinsky affair said, I didn't want to listen to, this is from the New Yorker, but this is a quote, I didn't want to listen to who blew who. I think that's just a matter of style, frankly. There was a cover billing of some supermarket tabloid recently which said about the television show Friends, it said, Friends, who hates who? Now, I think that's fine. That works for me. But it seems to me in legal context, who blew whom would be a little funny. So I'm not, but I have lots of, I just think the reason that people make, you should just, if in doubt, people tend to leap in the direction of whom, and they shouldn't. I think in doubt, you should leap in the direction of who, because if you're wrong, at least you're wrong sort of colloquially, where if you use use whom where you shouldn't. It's just embarrassing. People don't learn to diagram sentences anymore, and therefore they say things like, she's the one whom they said was crazy. I mean, that's just wrong. It's who they said was crazy, because she's crazy. But I can't teach y'all. Another example is between you and I. Now, they had this discussion in Boston, and there's a distinguished linguist named Pinker, Robert Pinker? Yeah,
Steve Pinker.
What? Steve Pinker, sorry, who wrote a book about language. All I know about that book is that he endorses between you and I. And I think that's just crazy. I think it's a yuppie kind of mistake. If you want to make a mistake, make a kind of folky kind of mistake rather than yup. To me, I think the reason people go around saying between you and I is because the me decade. Remember when people started talking about the me? It just made the word me sort of infra-dig in some way, so that people don't want to say between you and me. And so they say between you and I. And it's just a sort of fancy variation that I think, to me, language is a stylistic thing, and you should, there, for instance, ain't nobody boogie like the Blue Flames do is right. You wouldn't want to say there is no one who boogies quite as do the Blue Flames. It all has to do with context, but I think there's no excuse for using whom where any fool would use who, and there's no excuse for saying between you and I. That's how I'd like to start out this.
Frank, maybe we can go to you next. Do you have the sense that sports language still has the same influence on the language that it did 50 or 100 years ago?
Yes and no. And I first of all want to thank you for letting someone who's primarily a sports writer into such august intellectual company. We're not usually allowed, this side of the gymnasium. I think many of you are familiar with a currently unemployed a basketball coach in Bloomington, Indiana, named Bobby Knight, who's also a great student of literature and the language. And Bobby once said the best time in every sports writer's life were the 3 years he spent in second grade. So I appreciate it that you've come slumming with me this evening. But it's a level playing field, and I'm starting from scratch, and the ball's in my court. So I'm going to try to step up to the plate and cross the finish line. I don't want to make an end run here or throw a curveball, but I want to be straight as an arrow, run the table, and hit a home run. I'd like this to be a knockout because it's timeout and we all want to shoot par. Now, in answer to your question, those expressions go back a long, long way. All of those that I used right there are very old, and the fact is, I don't think any or very few new sports terminology are coming in. The richest ones, the richest new ones, all come from the sport of basketball. In your face, most prominently, slam dunk. Full court press. They love that in business. We're going to put a full court press on them. And I think that's because of the increased popularity in basketball. You'll also find something that's terrible because of football. In football, the team that doesn't have the ball is known as what? Defense, exactly. And that, unfortunately, is working its way through the language. I'm sure that whoever succeeds Mr. Koren will not be the Secretary of Defense, but will be the Secretary of Defense. And whereas my name is Deford, I know that my grandchildren will be known as Deford. And the worst place to hear this is when you're on an airplane. And the captain comes on and he says, he's speaking from the flight deck. I don't know why it's called the flight deck. It's not another deck. It's, as you know, just a little room up there at the front of the plane. They always call it the flight deck. And he says, and you hear this 90% of the time now, we are now about to make our descent into New York or wherever. So that's probably been the most influential a new expression in English from sports. I think the language in general is not as vivid as it used to be because we're so much more visual. There's another term in sports that you hear all the time, which is focused. And that word 20 years ago would be concentrated. But concentrated, you have to sort of visualize. Focus, you know, it's a camera, people see it. And so everybody in sports and in a lot of other of our genres are always focused, more than anything else. And the one expression which to me represents a sort of a decline in romance and a twist toward the literal and the technical is the polite expression for carnal union, which, don't worry, I'm not going to get vulgar here. I said the polite expression, which always before was to make love, right? And in the last 10 years, that's become have sex. And to me, that sort of represents, it's a slam dunk that that's the worst thing in our language. But I think that's representative of so much. I don't think language is as fun as it used to be. I don't think we have the play on words that we used to. And I think that's all attributable to the fact that we watch much more than we listen nowadays.
Rachel, maybe turn to you. What issues of usage bother you most in these days?
Well, I was thinking about this, and I was thinking that what really bothers me is usage as a term. I can't think of a substitute for it. Usage seems, though, to me, pretentious. On the order of signage and frontage and acreage and mileage, and they're
Don't
not
forget roughage.
Roughage, and of course.
Cabbage.
Roughage, cabbage, and my favorite, foliage, which in New England is becoming, and probably our grandchildren will say it this way, foliage, very frequently. So what they used to call a spelling pronunciation. Usage and seems to me just a little bit overinflated, not quite so bad maybe as methodology for method, or medication for medicine. A friend of mine's mother said that you knew you were really sick when you started asking for your medication instead of your medicine. And so I guess those are the things that bother me. I guess what I wanted to begin with is to talk about context, which has been mentioned here before. I don't mind lifestyle as an expression, but it bothers me when my students talk about Chaucer's lifestyle. I don't think he had one. And I was very distressed teaching Pride and Prejudice last year when a student said that she thought that Mr. and Mrs. Bennet and their daughters were a dysfunctional family. I just didn't think that was quite appropriate. Going in the other direction, since I do read a lot of Jane Austen, I was wincing a little when I saw Douglas McGrath's film of Emma, and that film, one young woman asks another about an eligible young man, is he a man of information? And the other young woman answers, all his answers seemed correct. Of course, in Jane Austen, a man of information is an educated man, and not a man who has his facts straight. So I think that language changes over time, and different contexts make different things more and less viable. And I guess I want to end by raising my glass to my romantic poetry teacher, Miss McGuire, who always giggled when she read the line from Coleridge's Kubla Khan, as if this earth in fast, thick pants were breathing. She spoiled the poem for me.
So what should we have this usage panel? Should we think about changing the name?
I was thinking word use panel?
The users panel?
The users
The
panel.
users panel.
We were,
Sounds like drugs.
yeah, we're all users. We have to
And we're all
commit ourselves.
user-friendly,
We're,
so
all,
it's,
we're all users, and we have to pledge.
Sounds like a drug reference, so.
Yeah, it does. That might make people start
Yeah, sorry, yeah.
using language.
Ed, I know you
Oh.
you brought us something else. We those of us who have to use words to talk about words are at a great disadvantage when
That's right, because I can take
regard-
refuge in images.
Yeah.
And, but I want to point out, being a user-friendly sort of.
Usage-friendly.
Usage-friendly panelist here, that I am referred to, unlike anybody else who writes, as in the usage panel.
Watch it, guys.
uneasy.
I'm going to be decapitated before it happens.
Let visual people in. And,
I mean, the usage panel, this is
Is it going to stop?
this is the virtue of not using only words, that you have objects. At any rate, the usage panel has as its group of experts, people who are identified as writers, novelists, journalists, humorists. I'm identified as a cartoonist, captionist. So, having read that, I looked up in this very dictionary the word captionist. It doesn't exist. The closest thing I could come to was captious. Now, captious is not far off, and in fact, more or less describes what I do. And it is, as defined by our dictionary, marked by a disposition to find and point out trivial faults. Now, cartoonists, I suspect, could be accused of that. And my own approach to language is somewhat captious. I mean, I figured the one thing missing from this panel is someone who's about 14 years old, who would accept pretty much everything in the pro and con in terms of usage. But I, being way beyond that, find enormous amusement in chronicling the way the language is changing and trying to figure out some way to make light and amusement of it. So what I will do tonight, which I think will maybe provide some sort of focus for a discussion further, is just show you some drawings that or cartoons I've published in the New Yorker. So I'm going to have to stand over there to read you the captions, since they're quite a bit unlegible or illegible. And it is my closest approach to being a poet, that is reading my work. So. Let me just take this. This more or less, I think, encapsulates this very panel, and it's saying it's getting much harder for me to distinguish good from evil. All I'm certain about is what's appropriate and what's inappropriate. Can you all see this from where you are? It may be that the light should be down on the stage, if you could. Great, thank you. Next, please. Sam is very focused. There's that word. This panel is more of a mind than you think. Next, please. Maybe we should try visualization, Chief. Being the firefighter I am, this is something I've always thought about in a difficult situation. Next, please. Your father and I want to explain why we've decided to live apart. The key term here is live apart. Without that, this drawing would not have any of the focus that it does. Next, please. The charge is sexual misconduct in the dog run. That is a dog, yes. Next. We're hoping for an uptick. These words I come across almost by hazard and by chance, and I can't tell you why they touch me in a way they do, but I think every member of the panel will know why. Next. Please help us reduce our garbage and improve our energy efficiency and our water quality. Help us to be eco-wise and above all, to empower others. Next. If you were to boil your book down to a few words, what would be its message? We can ask that of the editor. Next. Rufus, stop being naughty with Mrs. Curtis. The word naughty has always intrigued me, especially these days.
What is it about naughty?
Sorry?
What is it about naughty?
Naughty is so archaic in a way. I mean, it's in this era of permissiveness, if I may. Next. We're really bonding now, aren't we, Dad? Next, please. I'm psyched. Next slide. How is it gendered? An actual, something that actually happened. Which we'll ask Rachel about this later. Next. Something that always troubles me. Have a safe trip. Here you're about to climb into a tank and they say, have a safe trip. Next. Great for worship then, great for retail now. Next. Nicholas, I want to thank you for sharing. This is a term that's been around a long time, and this was from the 1970s when I think it first appeared on our usage screen, but it struck me as being very, very sanctimonious. Next. Hey, you guys, don't you remember? The big word here is compromise. These are all 3-year-olds. Next, please. The weather looks a little iffy. Next. Next, please. This is hard to read. We're working on reading readiness. Next. Go ahead. Press 1 for more options. Next, please. I was under the impression that the sex we were having was recreational. There it is, having sex. again, please. That's it. Well, all right.
Thank you.
I'd like to say that it's clear that Ed belongs here because the words are all completely clear, but we couldn't tell whether the animals were dogs or not.
Well, I was thinking there might be different species guilty of sexual misconduct in the dog run.
Well, that's true, but this is a question of usage, isn't it?
I don't know if it makes sense to turn to some of these ballots. We actually did ask about gendered, and what I did was I went through some of the ballots that we've sent out in recent years, and pulled down, in particular, the ballots from the four panelists we have here, just to see where they disagreed. But let me try this. Here's this is the August 1997 ballot that we sent out to the panel, and we give what we do is give an example, and then ask the panelists to indicate whether the word is acceptable or unacceptable. So let me try this. I'll read this sentence, and then you can indicate to me whether you think the word is unacceptable or acceptable. I'll ask for a show of hands. As a young feminist, I thought nearly every social problem had a gendered explanation. So how many people find that an acceptable sentence? Unacceptable?
A gendered explanation.
A gendered explanation. Yeah, now, I didn't give that one actually to you all because I didn't think to pull that here because none of you like that.
Must be some better way to put that.
Yeah. Rachel, you?
It's inappropriate.
Well, I come from a very recondite part of the world where people talk all the time about raced and gendered subjects.
Raced too? Raced?
And gendered subjects, yes.
Raced? Classed?
Classed. And
Raced?
They don't usually say
Who
classed.
knew?
But raised and gendered.
Let me try another one where the panelists we have here were a little more in disagreement. Hopefully, the treaty will be ratified. Hands on people who find that acceptable. It's kind of hard to way up. It's kind of hard to see. That's unacceptable. What is that? About 3 to 2? 3 to 2 to 1.
War.
So we had a split among you. Frank, you and Ed thought that was acceptable, and Rachel, you and Roy found it unacceptable. What's going on? What's your problem with that?
Well, I think I would vote differently were I to vote today. I think I'm changing on hopefully. I think there was a moment there where some people were really holdouts on hopefully in a kind of hold the line on hopefully way, and I was seduced by those people. There was somebody I heard of whose dying words were, "Don't forget, hopefully." And I thought that was poignant and charming, and I liked that story. But I think I've moved on, hopefully. On the other hand, you got to be vigilant because I have to tell the story about the guy who put the note up in my elevator after his wedding, generously inviting all the people in the building to come to his open house. And it said, "Your presence would be delighted at our party." Now, maybe that's going to someday seem quite conventional, but right now it doesn't to me. But hopefully, I think I changed on.
Well, we're glad to have you on
What
our
about
team.
you?
No, we're delighted to have you with
It's a
us.
hopeful sign.
It's a hopeful
Yes.
sign. Roy, do you still hold the line on?
Vote more prescriptively than I live. But I think, you can't say hopefully it's wrong, but I'll tell you, the other day, I was sitting in the subway and I heard somebody say, I forget the beginning of it. She said something about stealing some kind of sandwich or something. I don't know how it started out. Something about stealing some food, and she said, "Hopefully he will choke on it." I think that's what's wrong with that, is it's a kind of elegant, it's a substitution of an adverb for a verb. It's a unwillingness to say, I hope he'll choke on it. And to me, it always seems a kind of fancy dancing.
How would you use it? How would you use it correctly?
Well, I'm not saying, well, hopefully, I'll say we hopefully strode into the future, full of hope. I mean, that's the original meaning.
But hopefully it'll be a nice day tomorrow. That's not, that's
wrong,
not really.
But it's different from fortunately in
Yeah.
that there's a verb there. And you're losing a strong verb. You're giving, and it just sounds to me like businessman talk. Hopefully we will see a
Yeah.
profit in the future. Instead of, I hope you choke.
So you don't have a problem with hope, with
No,
with hopefulness.
I think
It just seems less vigorous to me.
Well, I agree with you. It's sort of, yeah.
Wrong, it's just less vigorous.
It's sort of like the industrialization of the language, that everything becomes kind of instead of beautifully ornate structures that are erected for our visual pleasure, they're steel and glass boxes in which business is continued. In terms of this, I'd like to just read a quick quote by Patricia O'Connor, who wrote a fabled copy editor of the New York Times, who wrote a book called Woe Is I. A wonderful book. And she says, to this point, she says, some kinds of flubs, and I presume this is a flub, flubs are becoming so common that they're starting to sound right to our ears. And I would put this in that's why I voted for hopefully. It's a flub, and it's just with us.
I just think language should be kept as close as it can to literalism. And there are two things wrong with the English language now. One is that particular things wrong. One is that people say verbal to mean oral, and people say literal to mean figurative.
Yeah.
And that's just, those are two radical mistakes. I mean, we're just losing the word and the word letter out of, and it happened, but it's a shame because a writer loses certain moves when the language gets flaxy. That's all I'm saying.
I hate the usage of excuse me.
The use.
Whip me. Taking nouns and turning them into verbs. I mean, that's epidemic. I mean,
Host.
yeah. Well, and I died when Impact.
Yeah.
I mean, that was the first one, and now it's just Katie bar the door. Every noun becomes a verb.
We actually, I'm just trying to quickly find a couple of the nouns that nouns as verbs that we asked you about, and let's see if you were consistent in that.
This is sort of one of the failings of English. You can't do that with other languages quite as easily as I think you can with.
And well, a lot of nouns.
Yeah.
About
Strange.
somebody figured that something like 30% of the English nouns began their lives as verbs. So
Oh, I mean, it goes back. You used to say would man the
monogram,
ship and all that sort of thing.
initial,
But
the,
somehow, when it's nowadays, it just sort of seems so cheap in a way.
I'm just desperately trying to find this thing here because I know it's in one of these ballots we asked you about demagogue.
Yeah, that's right.
Clinton will demagogue the issue. Let me see if I can pull this up.
Yeah, that's a hard one, demagogue.
Well, we'll see what dig this out. I'll look for this in a second. Let me try another one with you. In the meantime, how about momentarily? Here's one. The file server is momentarily out of order. Hands on people who accept that, and the ones who are down on it. It's hard to. What do you make that? I keep saying 3 to 2.
It's about 3 to 2.
About right.
So you guys, that's one we should have asked about. You guys were split on it. Frank, it was okay with you and okay with Ed. I think this is the kind of the liberal,
Yeah.
We're permissive, very
permissivist Green Party on the
And Rachel's changed on it,
And-
so now I'm the only.
and Rachel
No.
Rachel, are you okay?
No, I know I hate momentarily even more since that lady said, I said that momentarily, meaning a moment ago. Confused me utterly at a meeting. And I think that.
I
I'm
would
against
draw the line at that. Yes.
Let me try another one then here. Peruse. Peruse. That always sounded to me like a Yiddish word, perusal. But appropriate then for the context.
Appropriate also sounds good.
They all sound Yiddish. I had only a moment to peruse the manual quickly. So hands on. I'm saying we're not getting a lot of yeses on that. Yes?
No, I don't think
No?
so. I don't think so. I think it's a no.
Well, but we had a yes from Koren on that.
Yeah.
So
Well,
you can.
The old peruser.
I'm I use it as fodder, basically. I mean, I was looking at your questionnaire and jotting down notes, and you'd be surprised what I came up with.
Prone. The bodies were found prone in the beds, their faces covered with purple cloths. This was a sentence from the New York Times description of the Heaven's Gate or whatever that business was. The bodies were found prone in the beds, their faces covered with purple cloth. Yes? The no's are louder anyway. This was actually acceptable to all of you but Roy.
Oh, but I don't like prone. Did I really?
Because I was in the Army and I learned the prone position.
No, I mean, I learned that from Stokely Carmichael, right?
What, prone?
Prone, what was the position of women in the
right.
Black Party, right?
Was prone?
Prone? I'm afraid so.
No, but prone, supine. Supine was the.
Being supine. That's a pretty clear distinction, I would think, in Stokely's.
Well, you wouldn't use supine in that.
I would use supine, sure.
Yeah.
I would love leap the chance.
No, in this instance.
Oh, it's a mean prone. No?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, yeah. Supine means lying on your back, so those people were supine.
Yeah.
Let me find another one here. Enthused. The majority leader enthused over his party's gains. Now give him the yeses. All three of you, Frank, I don't have your ballot on this one, but all three of the rest of you like this one. So now it's you versus the audience. We've got.
I didn't say I liked it, but I must.
You just found it acceptable.
Yeah, what they tell you in this is that you're not supposed to say whether you like it or not, but whether you think it's acceptable. And I generally ignore that and vote on what I like rather than what. But in that case, I don't know.
Well, the thing is, if we'd been asked to come up with something better, we surely could have, but we didn't have the opportunity. Yes.
Enthused. Let me find this other one because I had some of them here. Demagogue. Here's demagogue. Clinton will demagogue Medicare, unwilling to acknowledge. These are all real quotes from the Times. Clinton will demagogue Medicare, unwilling to acknowledge that fundamental reforms need to be made in the system. Oh, yeses on that? Now you just got a thing going.
Well, I just like to say why I liked Enthused, I think, in that context, is there was a party leader, and it probably had a kind of tacky connection. I mean, any kind of politician expressing enthusiasm is probably enthusing because it's, it's a kind of vulgar way of...
You're demagoguing right now.
pretending enthusiasm. That's my... Demagogue, I don't know, it's like umpiring. I mean, it takes a, I think it's a kind of way you talk on TV. I don't think it's bad. It's not like between you and I.
I have to say that the usage that the panel's interesting sometimes when you're split on an issue, and sometimes when you're unanimous on an issue. And the one usage that the panel most unanimously disapproved of was the noun to verb to dialogue.
To dialogue.
To dialogue. That was really yeah. How about some of these pronunciations that we asked about?
Well, that's because dialogue is a pretty fundamental thing. I mean, it's people talking to each other, and you don't want to mess with that.
Yeah.
There are simple ways to talk about people talking to each other other than to dialogue. But to demagogue is a little more complicated thing, and for shorthand on TV, you might say he's demagoguing that issue. It moves right along. But dialogue is too important to become cant.
But dialogue, I think the other problem with to dialogue, don't you, is that it's a little sanctimonious. It's like sharing and all those words that you were
I mean,
Visit's another word
Yeah.
like that. Yes, we visited.
it's a way to
Visit is a country word.
Yeah, I know, but
I don't like to use
it's
it.
an awful word.
Visit with, well, don't you?
Well, but to use dialogue as a verb is a way of taking
Of avoiding it.
Of avoiding dialogue.
Dialogue, yeah, exactly. It's
Avoiding talking to each other. You just use these terms.
we're just dialoguing. We're not
Fill in the blanks with these terms, and they don't mean anything.
How do you all feel about critique? I have Frank's spelled here. We gave the bullets would prefer to be critiqued on the quality of a win rather than a loss.
I don't like critiqued.
Frank, it was all right with you.
I think that's okay.
I went with that one.
I mean, because there's a difference between criticize and critique. I just don't think there's an equivalent to critique. I don't think I would use that word, but I think that, I don't know there's a direct equivalent to critique, because it means like afterwards
Talked about.
you talked about it. Yeah, right.
Yeah, no, there's certainly a lot of this now. I heard somebody say, I conference down the hall, but I office across the street.
Yeah. I fellowshipped.
I fellowshipped at that Second Baptist. Or I saw somebody was disfellowshipped from a disfellowship. Defellowship. How about some of the pronunciations that we asked the panel about? Let me try this one. Hands on this. I'll spell the H, if I can spell it properly. Harass. Okay, so hands on harass. Hands on harass. That's interesting.
I was always.
Now the panel, how are you guys?
It's funny, I grew up with harass, and then when did the word come up? It came up in some context a few years ago, and
In the Clarence Thomas.
that's what it was, and I found out that I was wrong, that everybody had somehow carried on speaking a language that I didn't know all those years, and it confused me. Like I say envelope, and everybody else says envelope, and I don't know why I say that.
Well, that's a variation of it. But yeah, I grew up saying harass too, and I think harass sounds more like harass.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? Yeah, right.
I don't see any reason to give in to harass, actually. Though, I mean, I respect the dictionary.
Yeah, I know. I say both. That's one of those.
Can't say both.
What? Yeah, I do.
No, there were,
See,
one of
I
the
would
senators
think
during the
it-
hearings, in fact,
Depending on
was
how you
going back
feel,
and.
or-
I don't know. Sometimes I say harass, and sometimes I say harass. Sometimes I say banal, and sometimes I say banal.
Yeah.
and-
Banal sounds
Sometimes
more banal.
banal sounds right, and sometimes you.
It sounds like
soften
Cole
it a little
Porter.
bit.
You say,
I always say tomato.
I'll read you actually what the usage note says here. Educated usage appears to be evenly divided on the pronunciation of harass, and this word.
What do you say, Jeff?
I don't know. I go back and forth.
Yeah.
It depends on who's doing
I
it.
think you can go back and forth.
In a recent survey, 50% of the usage panel preferred stressing the first syllable, while 50% preferred stressing the second syllable.
There you go.
But curiously, the
Thank God
thing we
for it.
found, now when we looked at the comments on that, each side felt it was an embattled minority. So some people say, I say harass, but I've just about given up on this one, you know. Or I say harass, but I know I'm in the minority in this.
Does it have any regional kind of focus?
The English say harass more, don't they?
I don't know.
Try a couple more. The one that we, all of you, I think, agreed on, so I don't want to ask you here, but I'll have to spell the word. H-E-I-N-O-U-S. Heinous. No heinous, heinous, highness. Nothing. You guys were all on the same on that.
Heinous is
How do we do, Jeff?
You were all the same. You were all heinous, I think, on that. And I think we give that as first.
That's why he chose us.
How about the word that's variously pronounced despicable or despicable? Everybody. I think you guys were divided.
Pick is the operative.
Despicable. Despicable.
I don't know how I voted, but I say despicable, but but I may have voted despicable just because I thought I looked it up or something. But I don't know.
Daffy Duck said despicable, didn't he?
Well, I
Yeah,
go
Daffy
with
Duck
that,
said it. Let me try one or two more of these. Did peruse, premiere. Does anybody have a problem with premiere? The Philharmonic will premiere works by two young Americans. Yeses? Is it? Wrong? Is it? You guys still?
Especially if we're talking
still
about the Philharmonic. I mean, seriously, the context, I mean, if we were,
But if it's a new high school film, can it premiere?
Right.
If it's not the Philharmonic?
If it's just like the high school.
If it's a new.
The TV show will premiere, you have a.
TV show or something, yeah.
Or
Can that
the
premiere?
fashion designs will
Yeah,
premiere the.
I think it can.
yeah, I mean.
Maybe,
Yeah. How,
maybe.
Let me try one more here.
like to give
That's
it a little premiere.
By the way, I imagine that was originally a French word, premiere.
Here, yeah.
And one thing I think I've seen lately is that there are fewer foreign words coming into our language. It's now going out the other way, particularly to the dismay of the French. You know, le drugstore and so forth. And I don't think we're getting as many words in because English is becoming so dominant in the world that we're kind of just swallowing everybody up. And so I think that's another place where the language has lost a little bit of its invigoration from abroad, in the same way that I don't think it's as regional as it used to be either. I mean, you dined out on country and western for so long.
Yeah.
And the country and western lyrics now are just insipid.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they used to be so colorful, and it's not that way anymore.
Just money has done that to it.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's a real loss. My favorite, you talk sports expression, in driving, I heard a few times, this is NASCAR, asking the driver what happened after some sort of spin out. He said, "We got a little squirrely in the corners." And you don't hear that kind of thing anymore. I've been trying for years to use that, squirrely in the corners, but isn't it wonderful? And you just don't hear that kind of stuff anymore, you know.
But it's wonderful.
Yeah, I know, it's just great.
Yeah, I think that folk talk, I mean, everybody's so exposed to the big media that people don't make up their own language as much as they used to. There's still a lot of language comes out of the black community, you know. Enormous amounts of American slang has come out of African American talk, obviously. And that still happens. I mean, rap music and stuff is still producing, I think, word diss and things like that that people are taking over. Everybody hears the same language more and more. I wish I could remember, I hope I can remember this. I was down in Mississippi, I did a documentary about going down the Mississippi River. And I did run into language that I hadn't heard occasionally, not very often, but there was this cotton farmer down in Mississippi who said there was a kid who never spoke a word until somebody said, talking about soybeans. Now, soybeans are a new crop down there, for one thing, and the kid wouldn't talk. They didn't think the kid could talk until somebody came in the house and was talking about harvesting beans. So, have you harvested your beans yet? And the kid said, cut. Because you say you cut your beans. That's the first thing he ever said. You don't harvest beans, you cut beans. It's just, that's what people say. So I think expressions do still, usage does crop up, but not like it used to be. I mean, you can imagine if you were Mark Twain, who had the wealth of unprinted vernacular out there to draw on, or Shakespeare, who had nobody had ever printed anything yet, and people you could just make stuff up and make up the language, and it's harder and harder to make there's less raw material anymore.
Yeah, I guess my sense, looking at the new entries for the American Heritage, it is still coming up. There's, for instance, all the language from Black speech words like whack and dope and so on. Right. And also, but there's lots of media coinage, and that's one of the really new things, new in the last.
10,000 new words, is that what you said?
10,000 new words, and some from technology, some from all of these blends like jazzercise and monokini and frappuccino and Microsoft and
computers must be. Yeah. E-language must be.
Yeah.
There are, I don't know how many new words that Joe Pickett's here. He'll be able to, who's the executive editor of the dictionary, could give an exactly. There are hundreds of thousands of new words from computers and thousands of new senses to old words. A word like pew that had an old sense, but now has a.
And e-language is basically, I think, really nerdy and not good. I mean, it works in its element, but contrasted to folk language, which comes out of people who grow crops and drink and carry on, but e-language comes out of people who sit at the desk and fiddle with keys, and who, what I hate about e-language is just today, I had my computer tell me that my program had performed a permanent fatal error and would be terminated. Now, if you said that out in the street, you'd be in trouble. But all these, all these nerds just throw language around. It scares me. The first time I saw that on my computer, I thought, oh, Jesus, I've done something illegal. I'm going to be in prison. They don't know what fatal means. They don't know what permanent means. It's really irritating that people whose whole lives are in cubicles have as much effect on the language as we do.
Well, that's most of us nowadays.
Actually, Charles Barkley, many of you know him. You have to take his word for what he says with a grain of salt, because he's a guy who claimed that he had been misquoted in his own autobiography. But he did, occasionally Charles said some brilliant things, and he said something fascinating the other day. He said, the world's gone to hell when the best golfer is black and the best rapper is white. That's Eminem, if you don't know. But it's a brilliant statement. It just shows that, we're all, too much thrown together now. I don't know.
Is this your sense too, Rachel, that things are, your students...
That everything's going to hell in a handbasket? Not really, no, I don't think so. I was just thinking we're all sort of geriatric here on this panel. And maybe people with a different color hair might have a different point of view about the language. Mm-hmm. But why don't you...
By the way, that's an awful term. Not geriatric, but senior. Isn't that awful?
Senior, yes.
Mature,
Yes.
Modern
senior.
An adult means dirty,
Yes.
Right. Maybe we should open this up then, maybe to the audience.
Anybody young out there?
Anybody with a view on whether there can be female werewolves or whatever.
There's life in the English language. Anybody
Over
have
here.
a sense there is life?
With every word in that dictionary, every time it's going to, a new edition is coming out, the panel and the voting and the discussion,
Do we?
for every word that's going to be in there, you go through this panel.
Oh, no.
No, we give the panel. We don't ask the panel about happy hour, for example, just randomly reading this. But we ask the panel about these words, but sometimes words that have new senses, like critique is a verb. Sometimes interesting words. Sometimes traditional points of grammar, and so. There are hundreds of words, I would say, over the course of time that get asked to the panel. Now, that's a small proportion of the words that are in here, but a lot of the words in here are the names of tropical trees and so on and so forth. So just the ones that kind of have an interest to the panel. Yeah.
Would any of the panelists have any comments on the linguistic tendencies of our two presidential candidates?
They both have the worst, to me, never mind what they say. I've never seen two men who have the worst pace and rhythm. It's almost like they're programmed. Neither one of them speak the way normal people speak. And it drives me crazy to think, whatever our political feelings, that we're going to be saddled with one of these guys for 4 years. I've never heard such bad pace and rhythm from...
Bad actors.
Yeah.
A couple of bad actors.
And Clinton and Reagan before him, not so much the senior Bush, but both of them were so good with being able to handle the language.
They were fluent, but Clinton knew my preferred Reagan, but Clinton was very fluent, but there's not all of the things that will be quoted. All of the quotations from Clinton are things like, it depends on what the meaning of his is. I don't think he ever said anything on purpose that's going to go down in history. He was certainly good at doing sort of Oprah talk, and he's very smooth and but TV sort of talker. But he's not good in any kind of literary way. He never says anything that the bridge to the 21st century. Whereas Kennedy still had writers around him or something. Kennedy is probably the last one who had any kind of literary quality to his diction, I would think. Maybe Nixon. I don't know about Nixon.
Yeah, we're talking about two different things, aren't we? I mean, I agree with you, but I think Frank's point is that these guys put the emphasis in the wrong place and sound as if they're not really saying the words they're saying. Clinton does sound as if he means what he says, even though it's...
He probably doesn't, but he sounds like
He probably doesn't.
But they're both sort of English as a second language. I mean,
Yeah, it's true. Gore doesn't. I've never heard. He doesn't only pronounce every word. Pronounces the spaces between them. You know,
he makes a point of pronounces them slowly.
You have.
well,
What I fear most is being around after the speeches are spoken publicly, and to be in the private reaches of their green rooms to see exactly what how they're speaking.
And every once in a while, W tries to make a sentence that's a sort of speaks. It's like watching somebody put a barbecue together. There's just 4 pieces left over at the end. We have in the front row.
Thinking about youth again and kind of interesting young people in language. Do you ever think of consolidating this book like 5,000 words that leads to good sex or good money or a good, whatever's hot with kids?
So just make
So it's not a serious question, but maybe
No.
we need a Reader's Digest guide to.
Well, American Heritage does put out literally a preschool and a grade school and a high school and a college and I just found it.
But the good sex words tend to not work. They have to worry about school adoption.
Let them pick it up in the street, for Christ's sake. Well,
I think juniors.
They do, the fact is that there are these word history essays, and I know you, Roy, are particularly interested in them, and there are some particularly interesting ones at those very words, and I think that's my 11-year-old. The first thing she picks up a dictionary, she wants to see if that in there, and she'll learn something about the first occurrence in the language. And
I love
it was very clever.
little word history things, which none of us wrote, but those are really, I don't know who writes those, but those are really good. It traces I had a couple of them picked out, but then there are just some wonderful ways words have evolved from their roots and then through the usage, through the history of usage. I don't mean to suck up to this dictionary because I'm not getting paid either. This is exactly the kind of board I always get on. When we both know Mark Mulvoy, who was the editor of Sports Illustrated, and when he left, I happened to be at a farewell party, sort of inadvertently, at the Olympics, and he took me aside and said, "You got to get on one of these oil company boards." Mark, Jesus. But at any rate, you get money for that. But this is the kind of, so I'm not getting paid, but I love this dictionary. Is what I want to say. This is a really good, I love this dictionary before I was on the usage panel, and one of the coolest things I've ever been is on this usage panel. I think this is a wonderful book, and I'll sit down and thumb through it a lot.
that's a plug.
And he did get paid for it.
No, I didn't.
In the
You get paid for it.
Yeah, lots.
in the second row, and then in the back.
Has the advancement of women influenced the language, and have any words been feminized?
That's a good question.
That's a good question.
Do you want to speak to that? Speaking as someone who's written on. Has the advancement of women had an effect on the language, and have words been feminized? Let me say a word about
Words
that.
been feminized. That's interesting. What do you mean by that?
Like the word feminist
Yeah.
in popular culture is not the dictionary definition.
I should say that one of the issues I didn't actually, because the most recent ballots that I had for these 4 people didn't contain many of these words. I didn't ask those here, but one of the issues that's most important to us, one of the issues we're most concerned to refer to the usage panel, involves just these issues that feminists have raised about various kinds of uses. There are questions, for instance, about the suffix s. Sculptress, waitress, paintress, authoress, ambassadress, and so on and so forth.
I think that's always been sort of looked down upon, sculptress, doctress, although James uses doctress
Yeah, in some ways it's a defeminate, I mean, you know.
But actress is one, for instance, that the panel was interestingly split on whether one says Meryl Streep is a great actress or a great actor. Another issue was man in the generic of, can man, you know, when man first arrived in the New World and so on, people will be manning the desks. Heroine was another one. This is a word that you were. Can one describe Benazir Bhutto as a heroine? Can one describe? But people seem to feel that it was inappropriate to describe Rosa Parks was the sentence, if memory serves. But the panel voted, if memory serves, didn't like the description of Rosa Parks as a heroine.
She was a hero.
She was a hero, but Elizabeth Bennet is a heroine. So there was a very interesting kind of discrimination.
But I was very unhappy. I didn't like calling people the chair of the department for a really long time. I held fast at chairman. Chairwoman always seemed awkward. Chair lady is a different thing altogether. I find myself saying chair now without too much discomfort.
It's a really deeply embedded problem in the language, obviously. But using he to mean as a neutral term seems to me sexist, but it's hard to get out.
It makes for very awkward sentences if you have to say he or she every time.
He or she all the time, but it is a problem. I think, if I were a woman, I would resent the fact that he is used as...
Actually, I wish sometimes we had a new word.
Yeah, I know.
Instead of saying he and she, he or she, there was a word besides it, that we could use.
And that's in fact one of the we gave the panel a number of sentences of that sort. If a child wants to be a doctor, blank should be encouraged by blank parents, and ask them to fill in the blanks. That's, I think, the longest. It should be. The doctor should be.
Actually, I think it's sort of right around it, so you don't use he to mean everybody if you can possibly avoid it.
And it's one of the noted he is, I think, I'm not sure, but it's either the longest note in the dictionary or one of the 2 or 3 longest notes in the dictionary. Over here this way.
Yes, I have a two-part really. I wanted to know what the panelists felt about using a name in such as she pulled a Lewinsky. Like it describes everything without having to use a lot of words.
Anybody have?
And then I wanted to know how old are the panelists, because it would seem to me that a lot of younger people are using words or pronouncing them even differently, and that's what happens to the language, is that the other people are really passionate it. Do we have any 20-year-olds?
We've in the court, the panelists we sent out invitations to a group of people. We have a discussion among the editors and the other people associated with the dictionary, come up with a long list of names, run names back and forth, and then send out invitations. And there's a surprisingly high rate of acceptance for the panel. I think people are delighted to participate. And we have made an effort. Now, the panel, people can't be fired from the panel or retired from the panel, so the panel tends
like
naturally, it's like the Supreme Court, or the papacy or something.
Supreme Court gets paid, doesn't it?
Yeah, so there's a natural tendency of the panel to age, and we have made an effort, particularly in recent years, to include just a more representative group in every sense, and including more young writers. Now, somebody at 17 is not in a position to speak with any authority to the English language, but we have a number of relatively young writers that have been added to the panel in recent years. In the back. Can you speak up?
A lot of this discussion contributed to the evolution of the language, whether or not you like it or not. I'd like to hear comments about the destruction of the word, specifically irony, ironic, where it seems to be losing. It's being used, especially in sports, as coincidence.
Yes.
Ironically enough,
There's no other word substitute for it than irony.
That's the truth. There is no other word, real synonym for irony. And I know, because I've looked it up and tried desperately to find something, and it really it stands alone.
I think we had a usage note in irony.
yeah, people say things like,
I'd love to know it, because it'll save me from going to my thesaurus for the 20,000th.
it's just used too loosely. I mean, people
The
say,
words ironic, irony, and ironically are sometimes used of events and circumstances that might better be described as simply coincidental or improbable. That's what we've said here. and they suggest no particular lessons about human vanity or folly. Thus, 78% of the usage panel rejects the use of ironically in the sentence, in 1969, Susie moved from Ithaca to California, where she met her husband-to-be, who ironically also came from upstate New York.
Nobody named Susie, has it? If her name was Irene, maybe. Well, there used to be, everything starts with some kind of core meaning. I don't think I want to be able to do this right, but in the Greek theater, I think, the Iron was a character who didn't know something that everybody else knew. Isn't that right? Something like that?
The dumb, yeah.
And everybody else knew he was going on as if, so that the irony had a sense of two different levels of knowledge being, about it. But now it's, who knows what it means anymore, except it's just different from straightforward, I guess.
I have to. There's another one I want to give to the panel in the next ballot, because the sarcastic has been moving along with irony, and I heard somebody saying not long ago, very enthusiastically about a new boyfriend. He has a great sense of sarcasm. Way back in the corner.
Yeah.
Ed, I expect to see it in the New Yorker in the next 2 weeks. Yeah, that's a cartoon.
I'm unaware of this. I've never.
24/7?
No.
Not living in Vermont where you do that. Everything closes down at 5 o'clock. Yeah.
Okay. This is not something I've stumbled across.
Cliche. There's a fine line between cliches and useful. When something's really useful, then suddenly it gets overused and it's a cliche.
But it is kind of interesting when things take off like that and suddenly everybody's saying it. Right. And suddenly, I got an email from a student that said Frankenstein rocks. You've been reading Frankenstein. Yeah. eBay rocks, whatever.
Right.
Or whatever, as Ed would say.
Whatever, just.
Yeah, it's a way to avoid coming up with something new, new way of saying things.
Yeah. It's lazy, I guess, and it's also a way of saying that you know what's in, you're hip, you're cool, you're 24/7.
I think it moves faster through the language now, those kind of expressions, because of television and everything else. Something moves so quickly now, and probably moves in and out. I'll bet you we don't say 24/7 a year from now. I don't think it'll stick around as a cliche.
Not around the clock, anyway.
Yeah.
Maybe we can take a couple more questions. The gentleman here in the middle.
It seems that Americans in general have less respect for the quality of the language than, say, our European counterparts. What's the pace of change of American English versus other European languages? Do you have a sense for that?
Ed, you spent a lot of time in France.
Well, I'm up for this, but it's hard to compare it because since I don't know, of course, the pace of European or English or language in England, I do sense that we are rocketing forward to a situation which is much, much less feeling and thoughtful, and that all of these terms that are coming into play through the media, as you suggest, and I mean, some of the shorthand that's come along is kind of impoverishing us in a way, and a lot of it is just this technocratic language that has taken over, as Roy has spoken about, people in cubicles, and the sort of thing that I'm interested in is just that boundary between what is we know, us older panelists, and what has come along maybe from a newer and younger crowd. And as somebody who laments this, even though I will kind of say, okay, that's how people speak and I guess it's acceptable because that's just what they do, I'm not pleased with it. And I think of, say, how Wilkie Collins in the 19th century would talk about somebody extremely stupid as somebody, as this dense, impenetrable personage. And what we'd say about this dumb, expletive or blockhead or fool, that we don't have that kind of richness and so that's a short or maybe overly long response to what you're saying.
Let me just add one thing. I mean, as somebody spent a fair amount of time in France and Italy, my sense is that they're in worse shape with regard to these problems than we are. In Italy, the amount of English that's entered the language has just been enormous, and they just don't know what to do. They have a kind of question time now in the Italian Parliament, and I was over there while I said, "What do you call this period when people can ask?" He says, "Il question time." So even at that level, they're being just overwhelmed with English phrases, and they really don't know what the French. Similarly, they try to pass laws against it, so that, but it's a silly expedient. It's not going to work.
I was just in Japan, and it seems they're adopting lots of English, but it seems to me they're turning it into a different language. They have stores whose names are Let's, L-E-T', or Get. I saw a store. The name of the store was Get. They're just cutting to the chase in ways that we've never quite. You don't. Do the French still have an academy where they?
Oh yeah, and they have laws that what every newspaper in France would call un match de football. The Ministry of Sport is required to call une partie de balle à pied. It's over here. Where's Joe Pickett? There's Joe Pickett, who's the chief editor.
If the term 24/7 were in the dictionary, it's always in numerals, right? How would you wouldn't spell it out, would you?
No, that's in the dictionary because it is almost always, virtually always written as a numeral.
How do you look it up under?
Well, it should be,
as if it's spelled out.
If you look at 20, I think the next one.
Here in the middle, what would have take two more questions, and yeah.
We have an increasingly casual society, and in essence, what you're talking about is a breakdown of formalization in our language, which reflects our lifestyle. What proportion of that would you say comes from the dilution of our teaching versus the use, more sloppy usage of words, or use of words?
Is it the teacher's fault or the writer's fault? Is that what you mean? Well, I really think that people ought to be taught how to diagram sentences. I said that at the beginning, just so people have a sense of, I think it's fun to diagram sentences, and
people ought to read more.
Yeah.
I think if you read the kind of thing that Ed was quoting from Wilkie Collins, then you aspire to be more articulate than the generality of high school girls that I overhear on the bus.
Yeah.
Do you think that because we suddenly are writing again, that is to say emails, will that sort of bring things back and make us more literate? I don't know the answer to that.
It certainly
But it's
doesn't
interesting,
help with
isn't
the
it?
punctuation, is it? I mean,
No, it's
email punctuation seems to be a whole mysterious thing that I don't know.
But at least people are writing again who never did at all, and I find that fascinating. I don't know where it's going to take us, but it's an intriguing thought.
No, and it's also the case that a lot of some part of the perception that the language is going to hell in a handcar has to do with the fact that we just see more writing by people who a generation or two generations ago wouldn't have been writing. They would have been on the phone. So if they're writing emails now and there are mistakes in those emails, it's not fair to compare them to people who a generation ago weren't writing.
But maybe they will develop more of a care for the language just simply by doing it. If you've never written a letter or have not been used to it, and all of a sudden you're writing, maybe almost instinctively something comes back, sort of the human genes.
Right. Something that I think, Ed was quoting this Wilkie Collins thing, something that literary writers don't strive for anymore is that sort of resonance and rhetorical flourish, and this minimalism has come in to, I come out of a Southern culture where people like to write as if they're talking, and come out of an oral tradition, and there are very few writers anymore who want to sound like talk, and try to transcend talk but still be oral and try to get the sound, have a sound good. People don't tend to write for the ear anymore. It's a shame, I think partly this is a marketing thing. You don't get translated if you write for the ear.
Way in the back, the woman.
I wanted to hear your opinions on the difference between the words nauseous and nauseating.
I'm glad you asked. Just let me vamp for a second here, and I'll pull out this.
While he's doing that,
Rachel, we talked about this earlier, and I said, "Well, can I talk about this word?" And Rachel said, "No, it'll make me." What? What did you say?
What?
Which word did you? Sick was the.
I thought of a new term for 24/7. Maze Mantle. Willie Mays is number 24, and Mickey Mantle is number 7.
That's obscure. That's obscure.
I'm just trying to help.
By the way, I will say this, you talk about writing for the ear. I know for the commentaries I do on NPR, I don't know how many of you all are NPR listeners, but boy, if I misuse a word, mispronounce it, I'll hear. It's amazing. I'm absolutely frightened to death every time I go before a microphone. So I know that there are people out there who still do care because they let me know it when I mess up. No,
Let me give you then the example we gave to the usage panel. We can try a final show of hands on this. Then we can take one question of this. Roller coasters make me nauseous. How many find that acceptable? And how many find it unacceptable? That's about 2 to 1 acceptable. So you guys, Frank, you found it acceptable.
only you say nauseous.
The Greens found it acceptable.
You say nauseous.
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 And no, Roy, you found it acceptable as well. I'm sorry.
I did?
This one, yeah.
I'm trying to remember.
And Rachel, you were the.
I was the stickler.
Yeah.
I was nauseated by the question.
Right.
So if this holds up, the panel finds it acceptable 3 to 1. But I don't know what I'd have to look up.
Yeah, there's a dictionary distinction between nauseated and nauseous.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I must have just given you.
And we gave a bunch. Actually, a few people. I think the children looked a little. We used it. We gave one sentence that used it in what was traditionally the correct way of using it, The children looked a little green from too many candy apples and nauseous rides. And actually, none of the four of you found that acceptable. That's actually supposed to be the traditional, correct way of using the word.
We're on the cutting edge.
Yeah.
Right.
One last question here.
No.
How feels about what I think are origins originally ethnic slurs, like the Welsh on a bed or to jib somebody, or used commonly with, if you jib somebody on something, it comes from gypsy, and the Welsh on a bed is, slurring with book.
I think the gypsies may have earned that one, but. Well, come on. You ever dealt with?
Well, I was at a party with a man who got very distressed when what came out of his mouth was, well, I Jewed him down. And then he didn't know what to do with himself.
I should say that that class of honors we talked about at some point and decided that words of that sort maybe weren't appropriately given to the panel to vote on, but rather what we do is report usage, report what some people, the objections that some people have raised, and let people. There are extensive notes on those, virtually all of those words in this dictionary, but the panel isn't asked about them. Let's take one last question in the back.
I actually have three things to say. One statement, two questions, I'll make it very short. Blurt all of it out and decide how or if you want to deal with it. First of all, I'd like to say that I do love the dictionary very much. I grew up with the American dictionary. And in fact, I love it so much that I wrote a book about it. Publication pending, although it has been reviewed, which I entitled 10 Grammatical Errors in American Heritage. And it analyzes 10 specifically grammatical errors or errors in grammatical development because editors and on occasion these usage panels. And so far we've been very fond of review from a professor of English at UCLA. The statement that I wrote it by way of, well, I'd like to see the dictionary be even better than it is. The first statement is that one of the things that caught my attention is that since I'm the kind of person who likes to add up and check, when I add up the percentages of usage panel terms, they normally don't equal 100%. So I'm wondering, when that first happened, with the two uses I was looking at, so everyone seems to be there problematic.
What's the question?
Yeah, well, the statement is, I think we should, as a note, actually send out questionnaires to everybody and don't get 100% of them back. Because very often we get 10%, 5%. The other thing is that what I would like to see in the dictionary is something similar to the kind of thing we find in Professor Johnson's dictionary 200 years ago. A sort of, this is how we look at grammar. Because I wrote the book because I was finding a lot of words that were misidentified, misparsed. Words that are actually adjectives or pronouns and suddenly are modified by adverbs. Why do you say pronouns are modified by adverbs? That's fine if you want to create a system, but I would like to see sort of what those grammatic trends are.
Yeah. Well, what I'd suggest is, I mean, we would like to see, but for those of us who are associated with the dictionary would like to see, and Joe is here, maybe you can give him a list of these things, and I know he'd like to see this. But on behalf of all of us, let me thank you very much for coming. And
Thanks for listening. For more information on the 92nd Street Y, New York, and all of our programs, please visit us at 92ny.org.